¿Empezamos ya? Empecemos. Queremos darle la bienvenida a todos. Yo soy Susie Merriam, directora del Departamento de Urbanización en la ciudad de Watsonville. Gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche. Tenemos el equipo del Plan General con nosotros. El asistente director, Justin Meek, va a darnos una breve presentación de lo que esperamos ver esta noche. Tenemos Sergeant Planning, a Circle Point. Y a lo mejor se me escaparon algunos, pero estamos contentos de tenerlos a todos ustedes con nosotros. Gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche. Estamos muy contentos de poder compartir el trabajo que hemos hecho hasta el momento para la actualización del Plan General de la ciudad. Hemos tenido una campaña de información de lo que les gusta, lo que no les gusta, lo que la gente quiera ver en el futuro y ver o recibir información que hemos presentado y recibido con la actualización de este plan, y tenemos ya unos cuantos escenarios para presentarles. En la década de los 60, Watsonville era una ciudad muy pequeña con unas cuantas fincas y ha crecido bastante. Sabemos que ha crecido mucho Watsonville y que tiene diferentes usos de agricultura y manufactura y que contribuye a la economía mundial. Y que desde el principio de la ciudad mucha gente ha trabajado en la industria de la agricultura, pero aquí estamos ya en el 2023. Hemos estado en existencia por más de 150 años y Watsonville siempre va a apoyar la industria de agricultura. Pero tenemos ahora la oportunidad de soñar más grande, de hacer algo más grande, ver qué podemos hacer en los próximos 30 años y más allá. Entonces, ¿cómo se miraría esto? Tenemos que expandir los límites de la ciudad para alcanzar a lo que queremos. Los escenarios que les vamos a presentar hoy les va a hacer pensar para ver qué prioridades puede tener la ciudad. Quiere la ciudad crecer, darle prioridad al desarrollo económico y diferentes tipos de viviendas para nuestra comunidad. O queremos darle prioridad a otros usos como el aeropuerto, la industria de la agricultura. ¿Pero qué quieren ver ustedes como residentes, como trabajadores de la ciudad? ¿Qué quieren ver en las próximas décadas? No hay respuestas correctas o exactas para estas respuestas. Es nada más de explorar diferentes prioridades, diferentes opciones, pero si nosotros como comunidad vamos a considerar estas opciones que ustedes creen que sean las prioridades, entonces esperamos que todos ustedes puedan disfrutar de la presentación de hoy, puedan participar al final de la reunión, que nos den su opinión para ver cómo podemos expandir y crecer como ciudad. Pero y si no pueden hacerlo hoy, vamos a estar en diferentes partes de la ciudad, incluyendo los viernes en el mercado al aire libre, y vamos a tener otra encuesta para que nos den más información sobre sus prioridades para la ciudad. Por el momento, entonces, vamos a pasarle el micrófono a Justin. ¿Podemos dejar que Álvaro dé un anuncio en español, por favor? Para las personas que necesiten o que quieran escuchar la presentación en español. Mr. Álvaro, Mr. Al.
Yes.
¿Puedes hacer el anuncio en español, Álvaro?
Sí. Bienvenidos todos a la 2050 Plan General de la ciudad de Watsonville. Estamos haciendo esto para mirar cómo se va a mirar el futuro de Watsonville, y estamos intentando de recibir los impuestos de toda la comunidad. Queremos escuchar todos sus respuestas o opiniones y lo que piensan en el futuro. Y ahorita va a empezar la presentación Justin, y muchas gracias.
If you could just let them know to press the interpretation, the Spanish, if they want the Spanish
Y luego
interpretation.
si quieren en español, pueden oprimir el botón de español para escuchar en español.
Thank you. Gracias. All right, Justin, you want to take it away?
Certainly. Thank you. That was a great introduction and highlight to what we're going to be going through tonight. Tonight's agenda is fairly packed, so I'm going to be trying to cover a lot of territory, but also provide time and space to hear from all the participants here tonight. Just as a quick overview, I'm going to touch on the general plan process, what a general plan is, the overall project schedule, highlight some of the community engagement activities that I've done to date, and how that has informed some of the guiding principles that will guide this planning effort in updating the general plan. Then we're going to shift to discussion on different kinds of place types. We're placing a different focus on the general plan from land uses to more character-driven place types and how the community might evolve and change, which will inform different land use concepts and ultimately growth scenarios that are to be presented for everyone's input and consideration. Those includes, everything from place types that are more residential oriented to more predominantly commercial, and growth scenarios that look at growing in and up and perhaps out in some of our growth areas that have been explored in the past, and even include some more controversial topics of whether or not closure of the airport is something that Watsonville wants to pursue. And just as a way to give you a little precursor, looking at possible closure of another airport, but cross-run one way. And then we'll have a nice breakout session in which to gauge your thoughts on all these topics with an opportunity to report back out to the wider group. So that's an overview of tonight's agenda, and let's continue to move forward.
Great. So just a couple of
go ahead.
I was going to say just a couple of quick notes. We're going to do some online kind of surveying of folks in the room. So as we noted, the things on the right side or the left side there, we've got Spanish translation available. We've got the chat available for you to use throughout the meeting. You can put in questions, you can put in comments. If you're having trouble with our tool that we're using tonight, you can also put responses there. So that is for you to use. We do ask that everyone, of course, is respectful of one another and of the team that's here as well. So just thinking about that with the chat as well. If you do have a question, we are going to try to do more of the interactive voices at the end of the meeting when we do some breakout sessions, but definitely put your questions and comments into the chat. That is at the bottom of the screen there. And we will now jump over to, I think, our interactive portion of the meeting. And so we're going to use this throughout the meeting from time to time. So Justin's going to present a lot of great information, and then we're going to take a pause and ask a couple of questions and allow you to do that. And so the easiest way to do this is to take your smartphone if you have it with you. That way you can keep the presentation going on your screen, your laptop or your computer screen, and use the phone to do some of these survey questions. So you can either go on your phone to www.menti.com and put in that code, or you can just hover over that QR code if you're familiar with those, and that'll take you directly to the survey tool that is called Mentimeter. So I'll give everyone a chance to do that. Hopefully you've got that. And we'll do one tester question. We'll see how many people we have on using the tool here. So first question we're going to ask, or 11 people, I see people joining on there. And this is just the ability to type in your answer. So you should see a question pop up on your screen in the menti.com site that asking you what your favorite fruit is. And so you'll start to see the responses pop up on the screen. And if you didn't get a chance to do that QR code, there is the menti.com, and the number will always be at the top of the screen when we're asking questions. And so we'll come back to this tool periodically. We've got a few more questions we're going to ask before I turn it back over to Justin to do the lion's share of the presentation. So it looks like we've got some mango lovers in the crowd. Avocados, raspberry, guava, peach. Hopefully everyone's getting the hang of the tool. Sometimes it'll be you type in a word, sometimes it'll be responding to a question. So we'll hopefully get a few more takers there. Maybe just go ahead to the next one, Monica. So the next question we want to ask is, what part of the city do you live in? And you'll see the 7 different council districts there on the screen, along with a map that kind of helps you orient in case you forgot or you're not sure. And if you're still not sure, you have an option there as well. There's an option for if you do not live in Watsonville, but you maybe own property or work in the city, or you don't live here and you have another interest in the city. And so we'll go to the next slide that I'll recap those as well, but this is the interactive portion. So what you see on your phone will be a little bit different than what you see on the screen here, but this will start populating answers there. So there we go. We've got somebody from all of the districts, which is great, good representation. We're hoping that some more folks join on throughout the evening as well. We've got a few folks that work and or own some property, and then a couple that are here just representing different interests, which is great to have some other community members outside of the city here as well. All right, a little snapshot there. And these are just for us to give again, it's just a quick snapshot. We're not using this for anything, but to give us some information about who's in the room, so to speak, the virtual room here. So the next question is asking about your age. So not to be too invasive, but we like to know if we're getting a good cross-section of the community from an age perspective as well. So we'll go to that next slide with the actual question. So under 18, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45, 54, 55, 64, and 65 plus. So pretty good spread right now. It might be missing a little of the youth perspective, but that's, can we post the QR code again? Yes, we will try to do that. Once we get through this question, Monica, I'm not sure if we can go back to that without it generating it again. Okay. And you can also just enter menti.com, but there's certainly the QR code takes you right there. So here's that QR code again for those that may not have got it the first time. And then we have just a couple more questions just to ask for who's in the room, and then I'll turn it over to Justin. So we'll go ahead to that next one, Monica, which I think was, have you participated in the Watsonville general plan process so far? So there was a survey, as Susie mentioned. There have been several different focus group meetings. We've had a general plan workshop prior to this one. You may have dropped by a pop-up event where you've seen some of the project, the planning team or the staff. So we've got at least one newcomer so far, a couple of newcomers, which is great, and a few that have been here for a while or have participated in several different events. So welcome back. And sometimes it is hard to know because you may be involved in so many things in the city. Probably the general plan was one of them, but it may be hard to tell what you've been answering questions about. So that's great too. So lots of folks that have participated several times, which is great, and a few newcomers as well. So wonderful. All right, and then just one last question here. How did you hear about the workshop tonight? And this is always helpful in terms of getting the word out and letting people know around the next time what are some of the better ways to get the word out. And so you see some different choices: social media, received an email, farmers market, or another pop-up directly from a friend or colleague. You may be a CAC member, and special recognition to a couple of those. I know we have at least one or two CAC members on the call, the Community Advisory Committee. They've been really helpful throughout this process as well. So somebody from the farmers market, a couple, as I mentioned, a couple CAC members. Whoop. We moved a little too quickly there. There we go. We're toggling back and forth between the PowerPoint and these interactive questions. So the emails seem to be working pretty well. So that's a great news for the team to be able to really double down and focus on those. And then directly word of mouth from somebody you know, which always is a great way to encourage people to participate. So, all right, so thanks for responding to those. We will do some more questions at different points throughout the presentation, but at this point, I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Thank you, Susan. So some of you, this will be a recap. For others, this might be new information. So we first just want to orient you with the general plan. So let me give you a brief overview of what the general plan entails and we're on the schedule. So I know there's some that have been part of this process for, in some cases, decades. And for others, if this is your first time, let me just let you know that a general plan is a comprehensive document for charting the future growth of a community. It's typically long range, so we're usually looking 20 to 30 years into the future. It's something that's required by state law, but there's no necessary timetable. It's a living document that is updated as needed, and usually when there's views for changes for a community. It establishes the goals, policies, and how those things will be implemented in shaping a community. Let's go on the next slide. One thing I just want to highlight is, the city has a current general plan. It's the 2005 general plan. For those that have been part of the process in the past, they may say, wait a second, isn't there a 2030 plan that was adopted a while back? It was, and of course, it was a subject of a legal challenge and is not in effect. So we're working under an old document that we would like to see to move forward and better consider what kinds of land uses and what kinds of things the community might want and need moving forward. As with any general plan, there are certain elements or chapters that are included in all general plans, and they range in topics such as land use, transportation, safety and open space, and so forth. Go ahead and click. And there's other topics that are really important too that have occurred that are both required because of changes to state law, but are also just good practice to include in one's general plan. And those include everything from new topics such as environmental justice, which is a law that occurred about 7 years ago that focuses on whether a community that's disadvantaged has an over concentration of pollution in their community and how they might want to address it. The city is also engaged in various efforts to address climate and how to adapt to the changing climate and the risks that are associated with it. There's also considerations to historic resources, such as in our downtown and elsewhere, that can be included as part of this plan too. So you're looking holistically at a community, the built environment, as well as how development may both affect these things, and we want to help shape it. Let's move on. So we've started this project earlier in the year. The first phase was doing some engagement, getting a sense of people's overall sense of what are the key principles that that we want to focus on, some key concepts of what should be included, and based off of that have developed guiding principles as well as some preliminary ideas for what kind of place Watsonville can become and where, and the associated growth scenarios. In the coming months and into next year, those would be further refined so that we'd have a preferred alternative that could then form the preference of doing the environmental review that's required of this effort. So that's later of next year when we prepare what's called an environmental impact report. And along the way, there's going to be multiple opportunities for engagement and input as part of this process. You'll see towards the end of next year and into the following year is when the more formal public review period and hearings will likely occur. This in the next slide will just highlights the range of activities that we've done so far in reaching out to hear from members of Watsonville and the surrounding area. As noted before, we've been at the farmers market and other locations, held an initial community workshop, as well as a series of meetings with our advisory committee, both with the community and other technical folks from within the city and other agencies to get their input on this effort. We have a website that I strongly encourage people to visit. It's a wealth of information, and it's another way to stay connected. A simple way just to highlight the many ways in which we've been attempting to hear from people. This is summarizing the different ways in which we've reached out through August. We've done more since that time, but just noting the ways, the various email blasts to council meetings, online responses to an initial survey, different pop-up events, and so forth. And we'll continue this effort moving forward. Along the way, we've heard a range of things. I just want to highlight a few of them here. Everything from people's perception of Watsonville as a small town and how they would like to protect it, wanting to see a greater focus on equity, and how this effort can foster more inclusiveness while still protecting not only small town character, but also natural open spaces. Housing has been a reoccurring theme that's very important to provide for a range of housing for all income groups and people with special needs. And along the way, other things that come up as well, including not only our open spaces, but things like art and culture, providing more outdoor recreational activities. These are the range of topics that we'll be including as part of this effort. So those, in looking at both the past general plans that we have to date, and looking and hearing from community members so far, we've organized 12 themes that are formulating what we're calling our guiding principles. So everything from a small town character to fostering a vibrant downtown. Many of these things are not mutually exclusive, but overlap. So you can imagine having a vibrant downtown helps foster a small town character at the same time, providing a range of housing options while enhancing the public realm along our streets. And so I just want to highlight how these things can work together in certain ways, but also want to give an opportunity to gauge your thoughts on it. And Susan, I think you have a few things you'd like to add to that too.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions here. So these are really important. So these are, just to mention, these are the guiding principles for the general plan. So these are the themes that are going to be, we want to carry through all of those chapters and elements that Justin talked about and really make sure that they're being addressed in many different ways. And so we think that they're all important, but we did want to ask a question about which ones resonate most with you. So on the next screen, you have, the question will come up and ask you to choose 3. So of these different guiding principles or these themes, which ones resonate, which ones are most important or rise to the level of importance for you today? And it could change from day to day, week to week, but just wanting to get a sense from you, which ones really speak to you. And we didn't dig into a lot of details on each of them. We can make sure, they can draw some conclusions about each one. So we're thinking about, whether it's the streetscape, whether it's thinking about mobility options, small town character. Justin mentioned housing is something we've heard a lot about, downtown being important. So we'll give you a sense of, or an opportunity to respond to a few of these and see which ones, and you can pick 2, you can pick 3, as many as that speak to you. We're not trying to take away any of them, but we certainly want to hear what's really important to you as community members and stakeholders. And then we are going to ask another question right after this of something that maybe you were surprised is not there. And maybe we need to make sure it's either included as part of one of those guiding principles or potentially a new guiding principle. So these are draft form. These are really meant for you to react to. We've been bringing them out to pop-ups as well. And somebody's saying it only lets you check 1 box. If that's the case, then we're going to go with just 1. And this will be like really your gut reaction. And I think you can change it as well. So as I noted, we're not trying to change any of these. We're not taking them away, but we just wanted to get a sense of what is really resonating with people. So if it is only letting you check 1, I apologize. We were hoping it would do a few more, but it'll be, now you really have to prioritize, really, right? So I'm seeing housing, seeing mobility, streetscape and public realm, as well as employment and vibrant downtown. So those getting quite a few votes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and there's a diversity and equity popping up as well. So here they come, everyone. Now they're popping up. Local amenities and services. And again, we think and we've heard that all of these are important. So just getting a sense from those of you in this space.
And I just want to reiterate that, having local amenity and services fit in a vibrant downtown, for example, along with, say, focus infill. So these are not meant to be mutually exclusive, and they do have a lot of overlap.
Yes.
At the same time, as Susan noted, we just want to gauge your response of which one of these seemingly speak most to you at this point.
And if you're not on menti.com and you don't want, you're not able to do the survey, you can certainly paste your thoughts into the chat. We welcome them there as well. So please feel free to put your thoughts into the chat if you aren't able to do the Menti or you're not comfortable doing that either. And then the next question is just more of an open-ended. Was there something that was missing, or maybe you didn't think was clearly addressed or is highlighted as much as you think it should be? And so or any other thoughts you have about those guiding principles. So we'll see if anyone wants to add anything there. Not seeing anything, there we go. There's a couple things coming. So looking at transit and light rail, more parks. And on the website, there is another, a document associated with those guiding principles that actually digs in a little bit more, has some bullets underneath it, which maybe will give you a sense of additionally what could be included in those, but those are definitely something we want to expand on as well. So looking at majority Latino, so making sure that's represented there. Again, protection of agriculture, thinking about gentrification, so some concerns as well as guiding principles.
Mhm.
Really important thoughts too. And so we are, as I mentioned, these are draft, so we are continuing to look at those. A couple things in the chat about more seasonal events and festivals, so kind of that sense of community. Biking, making places easier to bike, shop, and walk. So affordability. In multimodal, looking at infrastructure, new businesses, all really great, important items that we want to make sure, and we will make sure are integrated into those guiding principles and reflected there as well. All right, thank you.
Very
So
good.
we'll turn it back. Climate change coming up in the chat as well. So we'll turn that back over to Jesse.
Thank you. All right, let's go back to the slides then. Perfect. So this next series of slides, I'm going to go into discussion on what we're calling place types. Thank you. And this may not be a term that's not very familiar with you. The main takeaway here is that using the concept of place types helps describe not only existing, but the intended character of a community. And so it's more than just the land uses that you find on a land use diagram or map, but what the character of an area is like and how that can be supported or changed or fostered in different ways. Next slide. So for some of you, I know they're very familiar with what's called the general plans land use diagram or land use map. And as you can see, it essentially designates the community into different types of land uses, everything from residential to commercial, open space, and so forth. And this has the desired effect of sort of differentiating different kinds of activities that can occur in that area. But, and it shows you just how much can go in certain areas, but it has some limitations. So moving forward, we're looking at place types. And let me just highlight a couple of the advantages for them. One of the things to note is that, in doing so, it not only allows for regulating the type of activities that can occur, but you can have a better sense of the size and design of buildings and how they relate to one another and public spaces too. And so it can help manage potential incompatibilities that sometimes may arise, both through land use, but also design controls, not just through, as I mentioned before, separation of those land uses, but it also helps give residents more options for how they conduct their lives, whether they drive, how they conduct their errands, visiting friends and family, and not necessarily force them to have to drive everywhere they want to go. So it's a way to provide more options and choices when it comes to organizing a city for people in conducting their daily lives. Next, Jesus. Some of the areas are distinctly residential, and some are more commercial or industrial character, and some allow for more of a mixture of uses. So as shown in these images here, these represents a commercial corridor, but also allows for not only say storefronts on the ground floor, but residences or perhaps office above, giving again the opportunity for those that live in this area or nearby to maybe go to a cafe or some sort of services that are within close walking or biking. So that while they may drive, they also have the opportunity to not have to if they so choose. Next slide. Key thing around the whole placemaking framework is that it's really a way to help organize and support people in their daily lives and conducting all range of activities, whether it's shopping or working, going to places to play or education, learning, or just a third place for gathering. And it's not that it makes every location the same, as illustrated in these two images. Some might be more urban or like in a downtown environment. Others are perhaps more of a neighborhood and residential type of place. And so this is the purpose of this is to help calibrate what we want to see happen in different locations of the city. This is also helps inform the growth scenarios that I'll be talking about a little bit. As we think over long term, over the next 20 to 30 years, some of the key things that we'll be wanting to highlight is, as we talked about before, housing. As Watsonville's population grows, how do we meet their needs of the future, as well as the requirements of state law? Providing a wider range or a broader range of things to do, local shopping, dining, entertainment, recreational opportunities. In previous meetings I've had with, for example, the Teen Action Council and youth groups, they've highlighted the fact that they feel that there's not a lot of things to do in Watsonville and what can be done to help broaden those things, as well as how we can draw in visitors and tourists into town to provide more opportunities to recreate and bring in tourism dollars. In terms of employment, there's an industrial sector of Watsonville, but there's also been views on how we might further broaden or support the existing businesses and further expand new types of job opportunities, as well as looking at the importance of our open spaces in terms of protecting our wetlands and other open spaces in and around town, and how they connect and help foster a nice, vibrant streetscape, and how those can play interconnectedly as well. Next slide. So the key concepts that we'll be exploring is not only what new growth areas we might consider, the types of uses that could go into them and other parts of the community that benefit what's needed today and in the future. What are the forms or the patterns and forms of that development? Are they tall? Are they big? Are they small? And how that helps foster reinvestment into the community that we can help foster or plan for. Do they meet the needs of today as well as the future? And are we missing anything? Are there other factors that we should be considering as well? So far we have a series of growth scenarios that we've organized just to help get people thinking about what's the future, as well as reflecting past efforts. So new growth area around Buena Vista beyond the airport. Looking at other growth areas around Atkinson and an area called Area C, which is a little bit north of Wagner and west of Eastlake towards County Land and Corlitos Creek. Looking at those, while those areas are predominantly intended for accommodating more housing, there's also need for employment and tourism and how to create a better gateway into the community. And so looking along Highway 1 and helping to take advantage of that area. And lastly, but not least, looking at the closure of the airport and closure of the Crosswind Runway, which would involve maintaining an airport, but also unlocking redevelopment potential. And I'm going to go further into these concepts a little bit later on. In terms of different place types, I had noted that they're not necessarily all the same. And so downtown isn't necessarily the same as the airport or main corridors or some of our activity centers along those corridors and neighborhoods in between. And so the main takeaway here is that we're not treating Watsonville the same, but also allowing us to calibrate what can go on in these different areas, as well as new growth areas, please. So let's start with some areas that are predominantly residential neighborhoods, our neighborhoods. Looking at some images, some of you, I'm sure, will recognize where these photographs were taken of multifamily development, both existing, old, and new, and as well as the type of housing types that might be able to fit into our existing neighborhoods moving forward. So, and these can be a range of different things that could potentially come in. Types of housing that do exist today, everything from single family housing to different kinds of multifamily housing, such as duplexes to quadplexes, as well as the introductions to different types that perhaps are not as prevalent, but could easily fit in nice to the character of existing neighborhoods, such as cottage courts or courtyard housing. And as I'll note, there's been an uptick in what we call accessory dwelling units or ADUs throughout Watsonville. Next slide. So this next series of slides shows just a hypothetical example of some existing neighborhood as it is today, and how that might change with some more infill, some more additional housing that doesn't involve major changes to the neighborhood. So as shown here with the yellow outlines is areas on, say, a typical residential lot that has some room in the backyard for an accessory dwelling unit or ADU. It doesn't change the character, it fits in, and as I mentioned before, we're seeing an uptick in that, particularly since the change in state law. So this is one form of change that fits in. But there's other things that we might consider too. In addition to ADUs, there's a term that's called missing middle housing. It's a form of multifamily housing. So a duplex, triplex, fourplex, these are examples of this kinds of housing type that could also fit in without really providing more housing options and more choices, and still fitting into the overall character of existing neighborhood, as shown in this picture. So just to give you some ideas of the kinds of things that could be considered as infill into our existing residential neighborhoods while further maintaining their character. Other types of places that we want to explore are those that are predominantly more non-residential or commercial, that are nodes of activity within Watsonville. And so those are what we call our activity centers. And they usually center around shopping centers along our commercial corridors. Examples of existing ones today are like East Lake Shopping Village and Kmart. And the reason that we're showing the Kmart here is not only have we heard a lot on social media elsewhere about what can be done with that building, but highlighting that building and surrounding area represents a fairly large area. And so we want to talk about what change could occur on some of these areas that are not being used or are underused and or vacant, that might be the subject of change over the next 10, 20, and 30 years, and how we might create policies to shape what that looks like.
And certainly for these areas, we're not suggesting that all the buildings that are there would suddenly change or go away, but that within some of the blanker spots, new buildings and new businesses and new activity could be added to what's there.
Absolutely. And I'm going to highlight that in next series of slides that will illustrate that, change isn't necessarily going to involve scraping everything and building anew, but might involve some infill along the corridors. But you can imagine that as that evolves and changes over time, you could see buildings as shown in these series of images of maybe 2, 3, or 4 stories, perhaps residential above with some commercial or retail below. The key thing to take away in the lower left corner is the importance of the streetscape and how that creates a sense of place that's inviting for people to come to that area, whether they're shopping or doing other kind of activities in their daily life. And with that is the need for enhanced streetscape enhancements along those things. And I want to show you a couple other slides that illustrate what that might look like, please. So looking at Freedom, just as an example, many of you drive this road and know it very well. And so this is what it looks like today. It's 2 travel lanes in either direction, central turn lane, and no street parking. Not a lot of activity on the street that invites pedestrian activity, I should say, or is very walkable. Traffic moves through here very quickly. And so one of the things that's important for Watsonville is the fact that it doesn't accommodate other modes of travel. And so when you think about creating more of a complete street network where you accommodate more modes of travel than just vehicles, this is showing that we have fairly wide travel lanes. That gives us some opportunities to add a bike lane. By narrowing the travel lanes, you're not really changing the roadway in any way, but you're accommodating bicyclists by not having them share the road, but having a designated bike lane for that purpose. It's not necessarily, this is not necessarily a redevelopment scenario for housing or other type of development. So over time, you could imagine that this roadway, if we're looking to further highlight the redevelopment potential of that parking lot next door, maybe just in the Kmart shopping center area, for example, might include something that looks more like this, where you add bulbins for on-street parking. Now you shift the bike lane in to make it protected from vehicle traffic. Looking at working with the property owners in providing wider sidewalks, but also increasing the development potential along that corridor too. And again, one of the main takeaways here is, while on one side of the street may not change, the other side could. And so we might see a piecemealing of this over time, but we can put in the framework of how that could occur so that you have a cohesive built environment over time.
And just let me introduce one other thought, which is that research that's been ongoing for a very long time has suddenly hit the national news this week. You might have heard it, that just making the lanes, the travel lanes a little bit narrower than they are, can very significantly improve safety, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Yeah, I would like to, you just gave me an idea that I just wanted to further reiterate, is not only do you have the traffic calming by narrowing the lanes, you also, with the bulb-in parking and street trees, you're creating barriers from the pedestrians to the traffic. It helps create a more inviting place for people on the street, as well as cyclists on the street, while still accommodating vehicle traffic with the same capacity moving through it. So there's multiple benefits with this kind of scenario. Moving forward. Now, not all areas are the same, but I just want to highlight the two carriers that we're looking at is Freedom and the East Lake Corridor. One of the things about the East Lake Corridor is there's some vacant and underutilized land that could be the subject for infill and redevelopment in the future. Again, not necessarily suggesting that it will occur, but were it to, this is some areas that we can imagine fostering some redevelopment that could accommodate more a mix of multifamily housing in forms that you see here, at perhaps less intensities or on smaller scale, but they can fit in more of a neighborhood type setting. Coming back to an illustration of that corridor, looking at what it looks like today, the initial step could be working with Caltrans, because they've had plans and previous identification of need for enhanced bike facilities along this corridor. Very wide travel lanes. It's, after all, a Caltrans facilities that has ample room for providing not only parking, but biking in certain segments, not all, I will say. But this is one illustration of how you can accommodate both parking and biking along this corridor. But ultimately, if this were to redevelop and evolve, what could that look like? And so we have another illustration of how you can create more of a place rather than a transportation facility that's more inviting for people while they conduct their daily lives and travel through the area at the same time. Moving forward. So now we have a pause here and want to get your thoughts on some of the ideas and illustrations that we shared with you so far in terms of the types of infill you think is most needed in the areas that we just presented. Everything from walkable shops to public spaces. What are some of the things that resonated? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, so you just saw the choices there, and there's also an other, and we're going to allow you to give us some of that other as well. But what of the various types of infill, which do you think are most needed in the areas that we're describing? So looking at walkable shops, looking at mixed use development, looks like mixed use is in there twice, multifamily residential, outdoor dining, restaurants, or what else? What other things are important in the type of infill that we would see along the corridors that Justin just talked about? So I see in the chat discussing improving the entry on Main Street, a worry or a concern about narrowing lanes leading to traffic congestion. So we could talk a little bit about that maybe as a little bit later as well. But definitely mixed use, because it got it in there twice. So mixed use development is something that people are looking for, which offers housing and the opportunity for shops and offices along those corridors. Couple just on multifamily, some more on walkable shops, and some on outdoor dining. And there's also an other there as well. So, and again, if you don't have the Menti, or you haven't loaded it yet, it's menti.com, and there's the code at the top of the screen. Also, you can continue to post ideas and thoughts into the chat as well. All right, lots of votes for mixed use development along these corridors. And go to the next one, Monica. And then we're talking, when we think about transforming the corridors more from the visual and the mobility side, what did you find most appealing when looking at some of those images or Justin's descriptions of transformation of Lake and Martinelli and the Freedom Corridor? So is it about the bike facilities, the visual enhancement, trees and streetscape, pedestrian comfort and safety, convenient access, slowing down traffic? So these are some of the choices that we have in here for looking at the transformation of the corridor. So some of those before and afters that you saw there. So the slowing down of the traffic while still maintaining the throughput. So we're not stopping cars from getting through. Access, so getting more access to retail and restaurants, the visual enhancements. Those were some pretty spectacular images, right? The pedestrian improvements and comfort. We've got a couple more for pedestrian, more the visual. And the visual goes along with the street trees and streetscape or the streetscape as well. So those are definitely tied together. So the overall visual improvements seem to be something people really appreciate about that transformation, but also just the access to having all those new restaurants and retail and the slowing of the traffic as well.
And the good news is that the same strategies tend to achieve all of those things at once.
And definitely seeing trees in the chat as well. Sorry, David, I was just noticing that trees isn't getting much love on the screen, but the trees is getting love in the chat. So.
and actually more continuous rows of trees along streets have been demonstrated through lots of research to make it more comfortable for pedestrians and to cause people to drive a little slower because it looks like you're in town instead of on a highway.
Indeed.
Awesome. All right. Well, Justin, we'll turn it back over to you to keep going.
Thank you. Good feedback all along. All right. So this next we're going to move from some of our neighborhoods and neighborhood centers and talk about jobs and employment districts. And so just to highlight that the general plan in terms of land uses looks at all aspects of the community and the importance of areas where people find employment and can conduct business. Next slide. Looking at our existing employment areas, everything from historic Martinelli's to our industrial zones near Walker Street and some of our office and industrial park areas. There's a range of things that we have today, but we also want to build on or expand moving forward. So, I just want to highlight that not only is it over on near downtown and those areas, but there's also some important light industrial areas around the hospital and the airport too that are important. And what that might evolve into over time, whether we can imagine some more light industrial type development, more industrial in that particular area specifically, and perhaps nearby, and at what scale could that occur? Another thing to take into consideration as we think about employment, but how people get around to and from work, highlighting the fact that we are in close proximity not only to Pajaro, but a future rail station that's in the works by TAMC and the County of Monterey. Very short distance away over off Salinas Road is shown on this where that's occur, and that will not only connect to Watsonville, but to the wider region, ultimately all the way down to Salinas and then Gilroy and the Bay Area. These illustrations highlight what's either existing or planned to be extended and developed over the next decades, which is why we're looking at long-range planning to take this in consideration as part of this effort. In our local context, where a passenger rail station might occur, RTC, the Regional Transportation Commission for our county, is actively working on potential stations that could occur. And one of the areas that is under consideration is the historic depot along the existing rail line. And so just looking at what's there today, what available land might foster some development nearby that could take advantage or help support that area could be the subject of this plan. And one thing I just want to highlight is putting together pretty pictures of what has happened in other communities. So you look at our historic depot, you look at these pictures here. The main takeaway that I want to leave with you is the larger picture on the right is one of, if you go back one, please, is showing an area in South Pasadena. And one thing to highlight there is that rail station you see right there didn't exist 20 years ago. And so these sort of long range efforts can lead to these kind of developments over the period of 5, 10, 20 years. And so this is why we're looking at how this could be accommodated in our town and what could fit in nicely to it. So in terms of what fits in, there's things that can be done to adaptively reuse existing buildings, whether we're talking about, like showing this upper left, a brewery, or in the next pictures, where you have some very low cost treatments that could involve not changing the existing character or buildings themselves, perhaps, but allowing a broader range of commercial or industrial activities that could occur in those areas and taking advantage of the funky atmosphere at the same time. Next slide. All right.
All right, so back to our Mentimeter.
Back to the Mentimeter. Go ahead, Susan.
And if I think we've had a few new people join. So if you have joined recently, you'll see in the chat that you can go to menti.com and there's a code that you put in there and that will pop up some survey questions. So really exciting about the opportunity for a new transit center. And we just want to get a sense from you of what kinds of things that you would hope to see around a new transit center. Justin showed a couple of pictures, but there's a lot of different features that could arise around a new transit center. So you can see the list there in color, and we'll go to the next slide that will launch the question here. So we'll see what kinds of features people might want to see. So we've got shops and restaurants, got parking, bike share, public art, public spaces, jobs and employment, housing and professional services, and another category, because there's certainly a lot of things that can happen, exciting things around a transit center, and even just the area within the transit center, but even immediately surrounding that as well.
We're not talking about any large scale dislocation of business of the historic industrial businesses, but rather, some targeted infill into some of the blank spot or some of the more blank spots really close to the station that could add to that historic industrial area, not gentrify it.
And potentially some reuse of some of the really interesting buildings that are already there.
Absolutely.
Around the transit center too. So
totally.
So seeing some good some thoughts around the employment and the shops and restaurants, housing as well, public space, some bike parking, as well as personal services. So then that's the kind of vibrancy that we would want to have around a transit center for it to be successful, is to have that great mix of different types of uses and features around there. Somebody in the chat was talking about farmers markets around the depot, and marketing some of the local farms. And it's saying that maybe the poll is not allowing you to choose more than one. So we're forcing choice of one, but that's, again, just to get a sense and allow you to have some interaction. Please post into the chat if there's a few others that are important to you as well. Definitely, I see somebody putting that utilizing the old depot makes a lot of sense as well. So, and murals like at Ramsey Park showing the agricultural history, so really tying into that. That's great.
Excellent ideas.
All right, thank you. So let's go to the next slide. And then Justin mentioned employment as well. So these were both considered to be kind of employment districts, or these areas that Justin was talking about. So we have some different types of employment that you might like to see around this idea of a transit center. So we have a variety of different types of employment there. So wondering, hopefully this does let you choose more than one. If not, I apologize, but let's see, we've got research and development, agricultural technology, small manufacturing and startups. Local trades is another thing that another employment opportunity that is pretty important as well. Looking at green technology, healthcare, wellness, retail, arts and design. So bringing in places for artists to do kind of more industrial arts as well as other kinds of arts. A few more choices or options around green technology popping up. Definitely agricultural technology. So looking at into the choice here, still only one choice allowed. So definitely please use the chat to put in some of your other thoughts here on the types of jobs. So you put in your favorite here on the screen, but would love to hear some more options into the chat as well to have a little bit more, which of these other types of employment really resonate with you. So looking.
And one thing I think that's sort of coming out to me is the fact that the transit line is within close walking distance to downtown. It's only about a quarter mile away. There's all kinds of retail and service opportunities within close walking distance nearby. So not necessarily needing to have that in this specific area, but maybe some very tailored neighborhood, more business services that could go into it, but not necessarily being the primary focus of the area. It makes, I think it's one of the takeaways that's coming out through here too.
And again, this is not the only option or only time that you'll be asked some of these questions. We will be asking, as Susie mentioned, future surveys, and we also have an email address, lots of ways that we want you to continue to engage with the process. So we can keep going and pass it back over to Justin.
Thank you. So let's talk about some of the potential growth areas that are under consideration in the general plan based off of previous efforts. As many of you who are on this part of this meeting know, there's been new growth areas that have been considered as far back as 20 years as part of Action Power Valley and adopted as Measure U. And we're continuing to look at some of those areas as part of this effort too. So the Buena Vista and Area C areas we talked about before. We also want to further expand on those growth areas to maybe consider some additional ideas as part of this effort. And that includes the Gateway along Highway 1 and whether or not the city might consider closing the airport outright and what opportunities that might arise. So in terms of these growth areas, let's go on to the next slide. Let's first talk about Buena Vista and Area C. As outlined in these areas in yellow, Buena Vista, for those that haven't been part of this in the past, is beyond the airport in sort of the western part of the city and beyond. And Area C is beyond Atkinson Lane and north of Wagner and a little bit to the other side of East Lake as well. The areas that are considered most developable are shown here. These areas are considered that because they avoid either prime ag land primarily or areas of flooding potential in Area C, for example, as well as are flatter and less hilly and undeveloped in the Buena Vista area. So those are the areas shown here. And go on the next slide. You can imagine as a potential vision for this, an area where it offers more housing potential in particular and a broad range of that. As shown in this illustration, we have a wide range of housing types and an interconnected street grid and pedestrian network that helps with providing easy access, not only for vehicles, but also primarily focusing on a nice environment for people to get around in a safe way. So as illustrated in this image here, you can imagine where you have front yards facing nice sidewalks, maybe some on-street parking availability, but really creating a place that has a slow but connected vehicle network and allowing people to feel comfortable on the streets with nice street trees and sidewalks interconnecting this neighborhood. Next slide. Another thing we can consider is how to provide access for vehicles along alleyways as well. And so as illustrated here, these same sort of streets could have rear access alleys that could help provide that connection, but also, move traffic around in a safe way in something that could look something like this. One of the things that's nice here is not only do you have vehicle access to the back, but you can also access to ADUs, as shown as some of the next illustrations. Go ahead. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Other things to highlight here is that with this network, not only are we looking at vehicle access, but other amenities such as parkland, where it's framed in, sorry, go to the next slide. A series of potential pocket parks throughout a network. So we're not only considering housing, but other kind of amenities for community gathering and recreational opportunities. Something along these lines could be easily a part of these new neighborhoods. Next slide. As I mentioned before, this is an opportunity to provide more single-family homes. One of the things that we've heard a lot about is the fact that there's no vacant land for a lot of large-scale development, meaning that the infill that we're likely going to see within the city limits will largely be either multifamily or maybe some ADU construction or some miscellaneous housing, but not great opportunities for new for-sale single-family homes that could still accommodate ADUs at the same time. And so this type of area could provide for a broader range of housing types. Next slide. Including not only single family homes, perhaps maybe a little bit higher density bungalow or cottage court type development. Next slide. Or even something what we call courtyard housing that frames in on a central shared courtyard, as well as more row style homes. So townhomes that are in 3 or more units connected together with, again, framed in this illustration around that shared neighborhood park at the same time.
And these could be either ownership and or rental.
Indeed. But it provides a broader range of not only housing types, but rental and ownership opportunities in one existing neighborhood. Again, as illustrated in these series of pictures, everything from small lot development of single family homes to more row style houses, bungalow courtyards, ADUs in the back or in the garages, and so forth. All these things could be part of a new neighborhood in one of our growth areas. Go ahead. And a nice illustration of what that could look like on the ground once built. Go ahead. So moving on to Buena Vista, there's some other areas that still have some potential, but are perhaps further constrained because of the terrain. So for example, in this area, which is very hilly, it doesn't lend itself to the same kinds of intensity or densities of housing that can be provided, but still could be developed with some larger lots, and with maybe some interconnected, more rural trail networks as part of that area as well to fit in. Others really have no development potential and otherwise probably would be avoided. In particular, if you go to the next slide, looking at the area C beyond Wagner, that portion of it we just highlighted is largely in the 100-year and 500-year floodplain. And for obvious reasons, we'd be looking to avoid any housing development in that area, but we might turn it into an amenity by providing parkland that could also serve as a detention basin during large rain events to help protect the community from flooding potential. Likewise, wanting to ensure that while protecting agriculture as well as the residents nearby by maintaining a buffer of at least 200 feet, which is the city's current policy, and helping to help create some appropriate separation from active commercial agricultural land and nearby residences, so that they don't, so that you don't get too close and potentially exposed to pesticides or other things that would not only be nuisances but potentially dangerous at the same time. Next slide. So given some of these things that we just shared with you now, let's turn it over and get some of your thoughts and feedback. As you know before, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. So go ahead.
Yeah, so this one we're just trying to gauge how people feel about growing into the Buena Vista and the area C. So that last area that Justin was talking about near Wagner. And while you're kind of giving us some of your thoughts on this, how comfortable you are with thinking about moving into either one of these areas. I also just want to acknowledge and thank a couple of the comments in the chat about really making sure or needing to prioritize farm worker housing, farm workers, and the working class. And it's really, really important that you're pointing out that maybe the images that we're showing and some of the emphasis maybe is not highlighting that. And so I think we'll definitely want to make sure that we're doing a better job of reinforcing that, because we certainly have heard from the community how important that is and how important affordable housing and services and jobs are for the communities.
And that's really the baseline. And that's what we're intending to show on the corridors. Also, because the downtown plan has just been recently completed, we haven't been showing the downtown much, but certainly the anticipation is that over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years, a great deal, the majority of new housing would be in higher density formats in the downtown, potentially along the corridors as well. But because this plan has a 25, 30-year horizon, we wanted to also mention these expansion areas because we doubt that the community would be comfortable overall foregoing any new single family housing for decades. So the notion really is that it would be a balance and mix of housing, with certainly the higher density multifamily options being the core. And then the question of where where it might be most appropriate to offer some options for folks to have single family detached homes if they choose and can afford it.
And one thing I like, go ahead. Let me just add one thing real quickly. Part of the challenge with the housing crisis that faces not only Watsonville, but California at large, is the lack of supply that's being built on a regular basis. And so part of the issue is helping to foster more production in general, but a wide range at the same time, so that you have smaller units and large that can accommodate needs at all income brackets. And so it is true that new housing is very expensive, but by providing it, it allows opportunities for change over existing housing stocks and people to find and potentially afford. Understanding that there's also programs that the city fosters for requiring a certain amount of new construction to be at affordable rates, and other things that provide everything from vouchers or other things to help address the needs, particularly for our very low income residents in the community.
Right. And I'm seeing a good chunk of people feeling pretty comfortable or very comfortable exploring, looking into these areas, a little bit on the not so comfortable side too. And so that's just something to, these are just alternatives or options and scenarios at this point. We will keep talking about these with the community and keep moving forward and looking at what does that mean when we say we're comfortable, and what are some of the elements of that make people feel comfortable or not comfortable is one of the next questions we want to ask. You can go to the next slide. So go right into the next question there. So if you were one of the folks, or even if you're a supportive of looking at growing into these areas, what are some of the concerns that you might have about growing into Buena Vista or that area C by Wagner? And these are, maybe things that can be addressed. They may be things that can't be addressed. So Justin mentioned a few obstacles that already exist. So land use inequity was one that clearly is coming up in the chat as well. Looking into the chat also, somebody mentioning about seniors wanting to downsize. So that's an implication, or it has an impact as well. There's some comments about trying to support property owners who want to relocate potentially or add features to their own properties, adding ADUs, moving into multifamily. So really providing some of the support. And we'll talk a little bit at the very end about the housing element. And there is another part of the general plan that's really focused on housing, and not just the building of housing, but also housing policy. And some of these things that you're talking about here also relate to that. So here we see the need for more high density housing, which wasn't really being shown in these areas. These areas were really looked at more as kind of an opportunity for lower density housing. As Justin noted, trying to find a balance. concerns about parking, concerns about
And-
traffic.
There can certainly be a mixture in
Certainly
any of these areas, and how
Sure.
that mixture happens is something we want to.
Yep.
We're going to be thinking about a great deal.
Yeah, and you'll note that some of those different kinds of housing types that we showed very quickly, I understand, from single family to more multi-family options, have a wide range of densities associated with them too. The other thing I'll just highlight is, we're focused on some of the growth areas in part because of the planning efforts the city has already undertaken for its downtown. And so that will be incorporated as part of the general plan, which means that we've already done a large amount of planning for allowing for high density housing, particularly in our downtown area. And we can also explore what that could look like in our growth areas and other corridors too as part of this effort.
So access to transit, lack of ownership, these are all good concerns and important concerns to think about as we look at those areas. And then the next question is really looking at what is appealing to you about expanding into these areas. So those were some of the concerns about expanding into these two potential growth areas. What might be some things that are reasons to, or that you found appealing in some of the presentations? So starting out with not much, nothing, that's valid. For those that found this sort of had some high comfort level, what are some of the good things? So potential for more home ownership or increasing home ownership. Other things that for those, there are more housing, more jobs, potentially. Any other factors that make you kind of, for those that felt comfortable going into this area, so seeing some economic development, the opportunity for increasing parks. Again, more housing, just offering more of that housing for housing options.
Everything's a mix and everything's a balancing act. That's why it's so important that we hear everybody's perspective.
So we see more economic development again, potentially jobs in these areas also. See a Costco pop up there. Tax revenue, so bringing more money to the city. Spaces, just having space to grow. Somebody added that one. So, all right, we'll turn it back over, Justin, to keep going. We want to get to those breakout sessions as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to, I'm cognizant of time. I'm trying to go through these next series of slides as quickly as possible, but also not in a way that you gather some of the key takeaways of each one of these. So let's move on to the next series of slides, please.
We're getting there.
No worries.
Toggling back and forth, it must be getting stuck.
I'll try clicking on the 90. Yes.
Well, are you gonna help with that candle? You're supposed to be helping. That's what I read on the thing.
Thanks for your patience. Must be tired.
Well, let's just go to 91.
There we go.
Wonderful. All right. So we talked a little bit about growth areas around Buena Vista and Atkinson Area C. Let's talk a little bit about Highway 1 as a potential new gateway. Looking at the next slide, one of the key things to consider here is, while many of you here today have a strong appreciation and connection to Watsonville, those that are traveling through the area could be remiss in not knowing that they pass by the third largest city in our region after Salinas and Santa Cruz. And so one way in which we could help with providing a better sense of Watsonville is also create a better connection and gateway into the community. Next slide. So looking at our historic downtown area, where that's located in proximity to some of our major roadways, Main Street 152, across the bridge in Pajaro, as well as 129, Riverside. Looking at the land area framed by the highway and some of these major roadways, that have high visibility off of the highway itself, how to take advantage of that, while also not only fostering connection to our downtown and nearby areas, but also the beach. There's a lot of things that could be taken advantage of and further fostered. Move forward. Looking at existing conditions, this is what largely people think of when they pass through this area, largely agricultural. Obviously, there's the historic Redmond House, which speaks to the agricultural nature of the area. Riverside is a state highway surrounded by agricultural land and associated packing and other agricultural businesses. And of course, the road to the beach is not too far away. But none of that really speaks to Watsonville. So what might occur over time if the development potential was right? Everything from considering maybe some regional retail, such as Costco. I saw that was in Mentometer just previously, to provide more employment and other shopping opportunities, as well as maybe a regional sports facility, such as shown in the upper right, for different kinds of sporting, soccer, baseball, and so forth, highlighting the agricultural nature of the area, maybe with some sort of showcase market, maybe some demonstration fields, and how that could fit in nicely with some of the adaptive reuse of nearby warehouse space in the industrial zone, as well as more visitor serving and tourist type development with additional hotels along the highway for people traveling to and through the area, maybe some more recreational opportunities to entertainment venues that could also fit into this environment. So these are a range of things that might help create more of a gateway and also an invitation to people to come to Watsonville at the same time. Next slide. Another key takeaway here is, go ahead, is not only looking at the gateway, but to the highway, but also across the river into Pajaro. I mentioned before that there is a new transit station that's in concept, and well, it's being planned out by TAMC, so how that could be better connected to, but also looking at the river and how it's currently more of a back of house scenario. Let's go to the next slide, and how we can help accentuate the existing amenity that it is along some of our existing trails that run along it and along the river and to some of the slough environment, and really face the river and create it more of an inviting place for people to take advantage of and enjoy at the same time. Next slide. Airport has come up a lot, both in our outreach and in some of our stakeholder interviews with people, surveys, as well as hearing from members of not only the community, but our council and their questions and concerns about the airport in terms of maintaining it and what potential growth potential it has around and on the airport. So one of the potential growth areas that's under consideration is the potential closure and redevelopment of the airport itself. Next slide. And were that to occur, understanding that there are development constraints with any brownfield site, it could provide a range of opportunities from employment to housing, maybe R&D and park space, and even retail. So the site itself is close to 300 acres. You can imagine that there's quite a lot of redevelopment potential that could occur on airport property itself. Next slide. But the main takeaway here is, as we think about Watsonville and what kind of place it is today, what we want to preserve, how we might want to grow and evolve over time. And that's really the main focus of what this general planning effort is about. But this is one way which we're trying to get a sense from the wider community on what are the key priorities that we should be focusing on. Go ahead.
I think we have a question coming up here. So we want to ask a similar question that we asked about growing into the other two areas, so the Buena Vista and the Area C, and asking a similar question about growing into the gateway, these gateway areas, oops, and the airport area. So we'll get there. And somehow they're not there. So we're going to ask you to paste it into the chat. We've been have some snafus. So maybe post some of your thoughts into the chat about why what you do like or don't like about what you do growing into these gateway areas that are some of which are not necessarily
¿Le parece?
And the idea of going into the airport. And we are going to do some breakout sessions in just a few minutes.
Vamos a
We'll
tener-
actually talk to one another about some of these and explore it a little bit deeper. But maybe if you want to
Vamos
paste
a ver. Okay.
questions into the chat.
Can you
That'd be great. So I see somebody asking about the blue zones. I think Matt Orbach is answering. that.
can you
I
hear?
see a focus on jobs and housing. Asking about Measure U as well. So
Ok, perdón.
let's see.
Estaba contestando acá el teléfono.
What are your thoughts
Ok.
about
Esta es la pregunta,
those different
¿qué
areas?
piensan
Positives,
ustedes de estas
negatives,
diferentes áreas? Cosas
neutral?
positivas, negativas, neutrales.
All right, I think we might want people to start talking, Justin.
Yo creo que quizá, Justin, podemos dejar que las personas empiecen a hablar. Ok, ya están entrando los comentarios. El espacio del aeropuerto puede servir como un recurso, podemos proveer servicios porque provee muchos recursos económicos. En la casa de Rodman, que está a la orilla del freeway, puede presentar también diferentes recursos. A ver, con los diferentes planes que estamos viendo. Un comentario para completamente cerrar el aeropuerto. Parece que ya estamos regresando con todas las otras preguntas. Bob dice se opone a cerrar el aeropuerto. Ya me respondió Elena, dice que sí puede escuchar. Si se acaban de entrar a esta presentación, hay un par de preguntas que pueden contestar. Si lo pueden hacer por medio de su computadora, pueden entrar en el internet en menti.com y está el número del código, aparece en la parte de arriba de la pantalla. Alguien está mencionando que el área del aeropuerto se puede utilizar para viviendas y parques, que las entradas a la ciudad son muy importantes y estamos viendo diferentes escenarios importantes para el uso de la pista del aeropuerto. Así que hay diferentes oportunidades interesantes para este momento que está pasando la ciudad. Estamos viendo diferentes comentarios y visiones y oportunidades para la ciudad. La siguiente pregunta, yo creo que podemos entrar a la siguiente pregunta. Si hay alguna preocupación que ustedes pueden tener, pueden incluirlo en el chat o lo pueden mencionar acá. Nos gustaría escuchar su opinión si tiene alguna preocupación. Yo creo que este momento es perfecto. La actualización del plan general es la oportunidad exacta para estas prioridades o estos cambios, porque los podemos comparar con todas las otras posibilidades que existen en la ciudad. Esta es una visión, pueden expresar todo, no nada más estamos viendo un solo tema, estamos viendo cómo comparar todos los temas. Y es una buena oportunidad también para pensar a largo plazo, tener una visión a largo plazo, para pensar en el futuro. Y de veras, tener una visión de lo que podemos hacer, lo que Watsonville puede hacer. Hay otras opiniones que han expresado también en el chat. La velocidad o el tráfico, la congestión del tráfico. Estas son las respuestas. Dice una comunidad que invite a la gente, que sea recibidora de la gente. La congestión del tráfico es una de las preocupaciones. Un comentario dice hay que mantener el aeropuerto abierto. Otro comentario dice no necesitamos el aeropuerto. Que necesitamos apoyar a los residentes, crear una comunidad, un lugar donde la gente pueda caminar. Pero que dice David, que debemos de crear una comunidad donde la gente se sienta cómoda, a gusto, sanos, tranquilos, que pueden caminar, pueden utilizar. Parece que las preocupaciones que han mencionado la gente han mencionado el hábitat, las plantas. A ver, podemos pasar a la siguiente pregunta, dice cuál las cosas positivas al expandernos en estas áreas. Vamos a ver sus comentarios, crear más trabajos, crear una identidad más de la ciudad. Hay que ver las áreas de crecimiento. Vemos comentarios en el chat. Si ver el aeropuerto como algo de valor y que se puede expandir a otras operaciones para recibir tal vez a FedEx o Amazon. El cerrar parcialmente el aeropuerto, tal vez una autopista. Muy bien, ahora porque ya estamos cortos con el tiempo, vamos a pasar con Justin para repasar los diferentes escenarios que él mencionó al principio y después nos vamos a dividir en grupos. Okay. Estos son los escenarios para el futuro. Estos son los 5 de los que ya hemos mencionado, que pasamos desde Buenavista para agregar o expandir los límites de la ciudad al área de Buenavista. Lo más importante acá es el escenario de cómo podemos crecer dentro de los límites que ya tenemos en la ciudad. Uno de los retos como oportunidad para la ciudad, aquí estamos viendo que a corto plazo podemos acomodar muchas de las viviendas que necesitamos, que estamos planeando en este ciclo del elemento de la vivienda. Los que están involucrados en estos esfuerzos pueden ver que a la ciudad le requiere el Estado que acomode más de 2,000 unidades dentro de la ciudad en los próximos 8 años, particularmente en el área del centro y con algún tipo de construcción dentro de los límites de la ciudad. Podemos acomodar esto, pero a largo plazo podemos planear algo diferente porque no tenemos mucha tierra disponible para construir, ¿verdad? Y aunque agreguemos o expandamos, si es que podemos expandir los límites de la ciudad, tal vez los dueños de las propiedades no van a querer construir o hacer algo. Y como lo mencionamos al principio, el aeropuerto presenta algunas dificultades en algunas áreas, como lo hemos mostrado en este mapa. Perdón. Y eso significa que si no limitamos el uso del aeropuerto, no se puede urbanizar el área en donde está Kmart. De igual manera, podemos ver el área de Buenavista, que es parte de la medida U, la medida Q. Fue parte de la visión de hace 20 años del el previo plan general. Esto está dentro de en los límites urbanos de la ciudad que se identificaron en el pasado. Acá podemos acomodar diferentes tipos de viviendas, aunque la topografía de los terrenos pueden ser diferentes, puede aparecer algunas dificultades, pero está adyacente a la ciudad y presenta algunas oportunidades para urbanizar estas áreas de la ciudad. Podemos ver otras áreas de crecimiento para la ciudad, el área C, el área donde está la calle Atkinson y donde está East Lake Avenue. Es un poco más plano, se presta un poco más para poder tener más construcción. Ya hay calles, hay infraestructura, hay proteína. Pero acá tenemos la industria de la agricultura que están utilizando estos terrenos y producen productos muy valiosos y no está dentro de los límites urbanos de la ciudad y habría que presentar algún cambio y aceptar también el cambio por parte del condado y otras agencias que tuvieran que aprobar esta expansión. Pero todo eso se puede tratar por medio de, pudiera ser algún parque, por ejemplo, pudiéramos tener otros usos en este terreno. La entrada a la ciudad y este escenario es nada más para ver las diferencias que podemos tener en estos terrenos. Este terreno, la entrada donde está la ciudad, es muy visible por parte de la carretera 1. Los terrenos son planos. Se pudieran tener diferentes cosas, hoteles, complejos de deportes, pero también hay muchos terrenos donde la industria agrícola prevalece. Pero podemos tener diferentes industrias, diferentes tipos de negocios ahí. En la que sigue. El cerrar el aeropuerto, ya hemos hablado de esto un poco. Una de las grandes ventajas acá es que no hay ningún referéndum que necesitamos para hacer cambios dentro de los límites de la ciudad, y al cerrar el teléfono, entonces eso abre muchas puertas para poder urbanizar el área de Buenavista. Y eso le agregaría casi cerca de 300 acres a los límites de la ciudad para poder desarrollar, construir, urbanizar. Pero obviamente tenemos que proveer servicios municipales acá. Pero hay un par de dificultades acá. Por ejemplo, que en todo el condado de Santa Cruz no hay otro aeropuerto. Los pilotos tuvieran que ir hasta Monterrey, y hay también algunas especies protegidas. Una de las alternativas es mantener la pista principal del aeropuerto. Para así podemos mantener un aeropuerto. Y para los que estuvieron en la Junta del Concilio hace un par de semanas, donde se presentó el plan maestro del aeropuerto, una de las cosas que se mencionó es que el gobierno federal ya no apoya el mantenimiento de la autopista, de la pista que cruza la pista principal del aeropuerto. Y ya no van a mantener esa pista. Entonces, no tiene sentido que la ciudad esté apoyando a mantener esa pista. Entonces, si la ciudad escoge no hacer esto, como se puede mostrar acá en estos estudios,
Next slide. So to recap, these are some of the 5 key growth scenarios that are under consideration, largely to highlight the pros and cons or issues and challenges with each of them that can inform what the community and city would like to prioritize moving forward over the next 20 to 30 years. Thanks. So finally, we've left a little bit of time for a breakout session. I'd like to invite people to take part in a small group discussion, allowing each attendee to be able to talk about their thoughts of what they've heard tonight, and then give an opportunity for afterwards to report back to the wider group before we close for tonight. And Susan, please.
Yes, so we're going to move each person into a breakout session. Each room will have a city staff member and a planning team member as well. And this is an opportunity to ask questions, to provide your thoughts, to have some dialogue with your with fellow community members. If you would like to have the conversation in Spanish, you can either raise your hand or note in the chat, or when you get put into the room, you have the option to go back to the
Bueno, pues acá vamos a dividirnos en los diferentes cuartos. Si quieren tener, si quieren participar en español, podemos tener una conversación en español. No hay preguntas específicas, pero vamos a reunirnos, podemos hablar en español si quieren hablar sobre su visión para la ciudad. Y de lo contrario, pueden participar también en inglés. Dice, nos atrasamos unos 10 minutos, así que vamos a tener unos 10 minutos para poder platicar un poco. Vamos a dividirnos, vamos a pasar a los cuartos individuales por unos 15 minutos y vamos a pedirles que disfruten, que participen y disfruten su conversación. Gracias. Yo creo que todos van a...
Looks like everyone's joining us again. I think the rooms will automatically close in about 3 seconds. So we'll see more faces in just a minute or a second. There they come. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I think we have everyone back. We lost a few folks in the transition there, but I think there was some good dialogue happening. I dropped into the various rooms, so I thought maybe we'll take just a quick minute for each of the facilitators just to share a little bit of what conversations were like in your room. And then Justin, I know you have some final slides just on some next steps and what to expect going forward. So perhaps we'll start with Susie. I know you had a small but mighty group there. You want to unmute and just share a little bit of some of the highlights of the conversation? Oh,
Zoom, are we?
There we go.
You on mute. Yeah, we talked about growth potential near the gateway, the popularity of soccer in this region, and how having a stadium like that near Highway 1 would be a great addition to the community, that Watsonville is a diamond in the rough, concerns with complete closure of the airport, given that during emergencies and other types of events where Watsonville might be closed off from the rest of the world, that is an important amenity, and also discussed traffic currently on our major corridors and the length of time it takes to get from home to work, making sure that housing and jobs are placed in the right location, so that traffic is reduced. And then is there anything I'm forgetting, guys?
Awesome, thank you. So how about Matt? Share a little bit about what happened in your breakout session.
Yeah, we had a good dialogue going. So I think the main focus was, the plan has lots of opportunities for more housing and jobs. It sounds like a plan that can actually be implemented, which people liked. Focused on, the emphasis on the train depot as an asset, the fact that we're really cognizant of the desire to build wealth within our community as opposed to necessarily having money flow to outsiders or corporations. Focusing on the gateways and attracting visitors was a really important point. And the fact that we're just thinking and talking about how to grow in the right way and exerting control over how our future growth, which is going to happen either way, how that happens. Some of the negatives or things that people wanted to avoid were, avoiding housing development in the floodplains, sprawl. There was a desire to correct some outdated zoning that restricts expansion of non-conforming residential uses in industrial parcels, and maybe a potential to do that sooner than the end of the general plan process. And also that people felt that there maybe should be a little bit more focus on low-income residents, not just within the city of Watsonville, but also in our associated community of Pajaro. So, and then the airport conflicting opinions, because there's always airport conflicting opinions.
All right, thank you, Matt. And I'll turn over to Justin. Then Justin, when you're ready after your report out, we can jump right into some of the closing slides. So.
Thank you. Similar things, but slight different nuances that I want to highlight here. Everything from some particular property owners in town that are interested in possible redesignating or rezoning their property to allow more infill potential with ADUs or additional units. So that's one thing we will definitely be addressing. In terms of the agricultural character, there's many people want to make sure that we're embracing the agricultural setting and like the idea of providing some sort of showcase or demonstration near the Redmond House in the Gateway area. Also in the Gateway area, there was interest in more tourism and helping to invite people into town. On the topic of the airport, there was a range of opinions from being surprised that the possible closure was being considered to concerns around what that might entail with understanding that there's environmental cleanup involved, to while some places feeling very comfortable with its closures, others wanting to at least maintain the main runway for some of the reasons that has already been articulated. Questions about traffic or concerns around traffic were raised, particularly on Main Street and not feeling safe driving downtown and being able to access shops or otherwise. Looking at the Freedom Corridor, not lacking some of the existing businesses along that, particularly fast food restaurants, and wondering what could be done differently and how that doesn't bring good jobs to the areas. So there was a wide range of things that came up during our conversation that speaks to it. And also, I just want to highlight also the acknowledgement of the notion of Watsonville as a primary Latino community of working class with a strong sense of place, and how that needs to be, highlighted as part of this effort too. So those are some of the key things that I think were that came out of our very robust conversation that I thought I'd just raise part of the group.
Terrific. All right, thank you very much. And Monica, if you want to pull the slides back up, we'll have those last few for Justin to close us out. And just want to appreciate everyone's input. And this is just the beginning of the conversations we plan to be having with the community about these options and these scenarios. And we look forward to your continued engagement. So, Justin.
Sorry, it's muted me somehow. Next slide, please. Just want to highlight a couple of things. We've mentioned this before. Just want to reiterate that this is one of many ways in which we're trying to reach out, conduct outreach. And so we're going to be doing more pop-up events. Some of you actually saw us at the farmers market. We hope to do more of that, weather permitting, as well as other locations too around town. In the first round of engagement, we did everything from visit food distribution lines to beer mule. So we're trying to read a broad segment of the community in places where they are as part of this outreach effort. So I'll look out for more opportunities for you and others to provide your input on as part of this effort. And we highlighted or you noted very briefly that as part of this timeframe, we're also updating what's called the housing element. While this is a specific chapter of the general plan, it has to be adopted by itself every 8 years. This is per state law. We're working on a draft that we hope to have available in the very near future. So for those that are interested in housing in particular, that should be going out live in the not too distant future for ultimately to be brought forward council likely in the new year, possibly in January. So please look out for that as well. And again, feel free to email myself and Matt, who's on this call too, and Carlos, who's helping spearhead that effort and lead that as well. All right. So I just want to take a moment to thank you. You stuck with us until 8:08 in the evening time. This is really impressive to stick out for a 2-hour meeting. We covered a lot of territory, got a lot of good thoughts from all of you. I really want to appreciate and thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Muchas gracias por todas sus ideas, sus comentarios, todo lo que han proveído, y esto nos va a ayudar para desarrollar diferentes escenarios para ver cómo Watsonville ha estado cambiando y cómo continuar el futuro. La presentación va a estar disponible en la página de internet de la ciudad. Vamos a poner todas las notas y una grabación de la presentación para todos los miembros de la comunidad para que puedan tomar parte en esto. Muchas gracias a todos. Y no es todo, tiene que ver con el aeropuerto, pero el concilio sí le indicó al personal que investiguen el cancelar o cerrar o parcialmente cancelar una de las pistas, y vamos a regresar con el concilio en marzo del año que viene. Vamos a hablar más en un futuro cercano. Gracias, buenas noches a todos. Que pasen buenas noches.